have to advertise a little bit more, right? We're going to have to do some more ads. We're going to have to run some more ads. We're going to have to do some more sponsorships in other types of media. And that can be a pretty interesting thing in a year that's been filled with, aside from the pandemic, we have a year that's probably the most polarized political climate we've ever seen in our lifetimes, unless there's somebody who was around in the 1860s. And we've also had, civil rights issues that just keep coming up left and right. And we've had, small events like hurricanes and
Right.
a couple of our states that are still on fire right now. So I wanted to really kind of get into a discussion with you about what should brands do about all of these things as far as talking about these things, taking a stand and taking a side. What are your opening thoughts on brands that put a stake in the ground on one side or the other of a political issue?
Well, it's kind of hard to see where the upside to that is. Um, we may be a strongly polarized country, but in political terms, a 60-40 country is a dramatic difference than a 50-50 country. And it's also
Mhm.
dramatic from a 40-60 country. But in business terms, 40 or 60% of the economy is too much to ignore. And I would dare say that if you're going to make a decision that you want to wade into the moment of political, cultural, and other uh, issues, you have to do it eyes open. It's not that it's wrong. It's that you have to do it and make a conscious decision that you're willing to take a stand on something. In the last year, there have been companies that have been willing to do so on issues that one would think have limited amounts of downside. For example, supporting racial justice, supporting women's rights, that sort of thing. Those are in the 2020 context fairly close to to apple pie and home matters, and yet those are still issues that are hot buttons for many folks, and it therefore becomes a bit of a touch point. And if you're going to do that, you have to make a conscious decision that you should be open, transparent, and explain yourself, and be willing to take a little bit of the blowback if there is any that's going to come in your direction.
Do you have a lot of clients that are or have thought of going down one road or another that that at some point maybe you raised the red flag and said, guys, think about this before you take another step down that road, or have you sort of taken a step back and kind of see what their final answers were going to be before they did?
Well, usually we find out about it after the fact, I would say. But
We have a big problem. We need help.
but there have been a couple of instances in the last several years, and by the way, a couple of examinations of this point among lawyers in some of our various symposia and the like. And what do you do when you've got companies that have become the target of social issues in one direction or the other? And some of it is earned because company took a position, or somebody in the company took a position, or sometimes even a large, fairly prominent franchisees taking a position, and that becomes an issue that the company has to address, or that the franchisees have to either suffer or perhaps even benefit from, and counter, in counter cyclical things. But some of it is also things that have nothing to do with the company. You and I were talking the other day about it, one of the prominent American retailers whose former CEO hasn't been involved with the company for many, many years, and in fact sold his interest and got out roughly a decade ago, was publicly associated as having taken a position in favor of President Trump's reelection, and the company was excoriated for it. Now, that's the nature of the beast in a sense. You can't control what people do, and you can't control what your former executives do, but you will probably end up having to answer the issues, the questions that are raised about those issues, and consequently I think companies would be well advised to have some sort of an internal plan for dealing with that in a highly polarized country, not necessarily because you're taking a position, but more so because you either do or you don't have the plan in place to respond when that matter comes up, because it will come up from time to time.
Yeah.
One of our clients just about a month ago had effectively had its parking lot taken over by protesters. In this case, they were protesters in favor of President Trump. There was a counter demonstration on the street in front of their parking lot. It's a large restaurant, and it became a cause celeb in the local community. All kinds of things ensued from that, including most directly the police shutting the restaurant down for several days.
Oh,
But they were not in a position to expect that. They had not taken a position, nor had the community associated them with the position until it became clear that there was something going on in their parking lot. And then people picked the side that they thought was more appropriate to their liking. But there's one where you're you're not taking a position, you're just getting dragged into the middle of this whole thing. Not easy. And you have to have a plan in place.
yeah. I think having the plan in place is it's the hard part. It's easy to say, you know what, we're going to support this cause, or you know, uh, we're going to back Colin Kaepernick, or we're going to not back Colin Kaepernick, whichever way. It's easy to make that statement and then have your loyal fans all cheer and that sort of thing. But I think the hardest part for any of these brands, and I see it with everybody from Chick-fil-A to Starbucks, that the media or some group out there gets it wrong. Kind of like you were saying about the retailer whose former CEO was making a stand. The media got it wrong. They reported that the guy was still the CEO,
Yeah.
or they didn't care to mention that he was no longer the CEO. And I see that with Chick-fil-A all the time. I see people say horrible things about Chick-fil-A because they disagree with something that the CEO of the franchisor said, or said or did something wrong in the past in their eyes, and they don't report that your local Chick-fil-A isn't owned by that guy. It's owned by someone who has probably never met that guy. But I think that actually is a whole nother conversation about the media and our government not understanding what franchising is all about. So I think having that plan, especially for a franchise brand, having a plan in place where you need to get out in front of it and explain, this gentleman is no longer the CEO, or the founder of the company has nothing to do with my location here on State Street in Chicago, or whatever the case is. So I think franchise brands not only have to have a plan in place, but they probably have to have about 300 plans in place.
Yeah, you got to have effectively a tiger team that's ready to address those things. And things can happen that are not political, that are also deserving of a response. One of our clients had some people who posted fairly um, obscene videos with their uniform shirts on. So it's
Mm,
got the company logo, and the guy's doing something stupid. That's a classic problem that's been there forever, and you gotta know what you want to do, how you want to accomplish it, and make sure that you're making decisions along those lines with strategic considerations in place, not just doing a tactical tap dance on whatever it is, but give it some thought. One of my clients got real bent out of shape because they had people dancing. It was an unauthorized video. They had people dancing in a TikTok video. Well, there's legitimacy to that. I understand. But by the same token, the people who see a TikTok video, there's nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't authorized, would probably find it kind of amusing, kind of cute. And in fact, it would ingratiate them to the brand.
right, right.
That's a concept that's not necessarily easily perceived by somebody who doesn't consume TikTok videos, and I surely don't for the most part, but I understand the people who do. It's explained to me every once in a while.
Yeah, we'll get some teenagers to come explain the latest TikTok crazes to us
Right.
once in a while. Um, but yeah, I think that kind of leads into that some of these things can actually be good for a brand. Someone doing a TikTok video where, as long as nothing, derogatory about someone else was said, or nothing that broke the law or anything else, um, that could be seen by a few million people that brand can't afford to reach with advertising right now. So it could be a good thing. I think too about, I mentioned Starbucks a bit ago, and there's a company that has taken some certain political stances, even to the point where Howard Schultz was going to run for president,
Yeah.
and he explained his platform and the things he believes in and the things he wants to change. And it doesn't appear to me anyway that has at all harmed Starbucks.
I don't think it has. And the bigger the company, the harder it is to avoid having to be out there taking a position. So I think it is a part of the whole equation. I think I think companies that explain what they're doing and do it rationally, clearly, and are willing to make a decision, that they're going to stand behind themselves will be okay in whichever direction they go. There are people, whatever, if you take a position in favor of oranges, you're gonna find that there are people who don't like that.
The
The
anti-orange
Apple
crowd is going
lobby
to
is
come
going to
out.
come shooting for you, and the fruit lobby is going to say, well, we're behind you 100%. It's just, you got to figure out what you're going to do here, and do it in a way that's respectful of those who don't share your perspective, which is okay.
Yeah, I think that's where maybe Starbucks did a great job with that, where um, I don't have to agree with the CEO on every political issue, um, but boy, I sure enjoy a cup of Pike's Place, right? If I like the product enough, I can get it. To me, it's almost like a great brand is kind of like a good friend. We don't have to agree politically to be friends. And I kind of feel that way with a brand. If I like the product and they treat me well, and they treat other people well, how they feel on the Colin Kaepernick issue, I just can't go around making decisions every day based on everybody else's political feelings, because at the end of the day, there's no one I agree with 100%, right? No one on earth.
I
So,
barely agree with myself most of the time.
right, I disagree with myself twice a day. So, yeah,
You
it's
got to reserve the
I
right to disagree.
I think that's something too that um, maybe some of this controversy, whether it's Nike or Chick-fil-A or Starbucks, um, I like to take a step back and say, okay, how much of this is media generated, right? Like how much of this is controversy for the sake of controversy, and it's giving cable news hosts something to scream about for an evening or two, and how much of it is really going to affect my experience as a customer. So
It's an interesting concept, and it's the media, but it's also the crucible of social media. So it can be consumer driven. There are things that I've seen on social that are just wacky, and they take a life of their own, which is sort of a good way to remember that, when you develop a plan for how you're going to use social media, whether it's or social networks, really, they're sort of lumped together as social media. But when you do that, you need to be cognizant of what's going on in context. So, we had a god awful hurricane. Well, you could say that about every week the last six
right.
weeks, but we've had a
Yeah.
god awful hurricane hit certain portions of the country in the last 7 days. If you were doing a media campaign, not only would it be ineffective in terms of accomplishing the goal that you wanted, but it would seem tin-eared if you ran it in the middle of that moment. So you may want to set things up, but you're going to certainly want to have the ability to call an audible at the line of scrimmage and decide whether you snap the ball or whether you hold for the next play, for the next week, or whatever it might be. Or it may turn out that you're using a person as your spokesperson or your pitch person, only to find out that they've just inadvertently been arrested. And you got to be careful about that sort of
Yeah, yeah, those things can happen too. I like I like the idea of being ready to call an audible, especially with your social media posts and your social media advertising that's out there, and and be ready to pull those ads in a moment's notice. And if you're working with an agency that doesn't seem real nimble or responsive, you may want to rethink that because yeah, that tin-eared feeling of running an ad that yesterday seemed appropriate and today seems ridiculous. You want to be sure to be able to pull that. The other thing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, is there are certain things on the calendar that we can just avoid. You know, I frequently tell our clients, unless you have something really inspirational to say, what are you going to post on Martin Luther King's birthday or Veterans Day? Or you know, a few other days throughout the year, Memorial Day, perhaps. You know, and everyone else is going to be sharing great quotes and you know, sharing positive ideas and things like that. And if you're just throwing up some, you know, just a you know, some sort of stock photo with your logo on it, I'd really rather you waited a couple of days and said something else, because I think there's a I think there's a feeling out there of, and I don't really know what the right term for it is. I know with climate change we call it greenwashing, but it's people just, you know, jumping onto something, putting their logo on it. You know, any oil company that I see run an ad about you know, how they care about climate change and then a big logo at the end, that always kind of makes me wonder what they're doing.
it's hard. And you know, from the standpoint of handling your trademarks, the legal aspect of it, the more you do to water down the distinctiveness of what you stand for, and your trademarks are used to do, the harder it is for you to defend those trademarks. It's a setting where it really makes a difference. For example, a pirate is not franchisee that continues to use them. You've got to be careful about not letting your marks become genericized. Advertising can be a very effective way of making sure your marks are properly understood to be your trademarks, but making them a little bit less than what they should be is not to your advantage ever, both from an advertising standpoint and from a brand protection standpoint.
Yeah, the one that I think I dislike the most is when a celebrity dies and someone just puts up a picture of, whether it's Eddie Van Halen or, you know, someone else, and just puts their logo on it and said, you know, R.I.P. Eddie. And it's like, you know, unless he was your partner and used your brand of guitars, or unless maybe you guys were involved in a project or a charity or something at some point, I don't know. I don't think that that's a a good use of marketing, because it's also not that memorable. You know, do something about you at some point. And and I think especially with some of the more recent issues in this country, with, you know, a lot of the protests and things like that, we did see some brands that, you know, just jumped in on it and put something up with a Black Lives Matter hashtag or something like that. And a few people got called out with that. Like, well, what are you actually doing to improve things? And, you know, what are you doing except for sort of riding the coattails here and, you know, changing your profile picture on Facebook? That's that's nice, but, you know, you're probably getting more benefit out of that than you are helping other people. So I like to recommend against just jumping on something unless you're actually doing something. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the general rule of thumb on using social has always been to me speak and say something useful and meaningful. And if you don't have anything useful or meaningful to say, wait until you do.
Excellent. That's some good advice right there. Um, you've you've had kind of an interesting past few years when it comes to social media in that I talk to a lot of attorneys who just want to say no to everything. They don't want to be on social media. They don't even use LinkedIn. They just don't see an upside to it. You've always been pretty progressive with that in doing it in a smart way, sharing ideas with others, especially in the franchising industry on LinkedIn or Facebook. I think you were probably one of the first lawyers I knew who was actively engaging with people on Facebook or LinkedIn. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I'm not sure I do it well. I just do it sometimes.
Oh, I think you
Um,
do it quite well.
well,
I'll give
thank
you
you.
that. Absolutely.
We have clients who use it and use those media, and I speak on the topic, and I realize that if I don't do it, and I don't understand how to consume it and how to uh, put things out there that I hope are useful, then I'm not really going to be in a position to provide much useful guidance or advice to our clients who are looking to try to figure out not just how to use it, but what the implications are from a legal perspective. So that's how I became started in it, and I'm not sure that I'm able to understand precisely the best way to use most platforms, but I try to see if I can do things, and I do enjoy the videos my kids post of their trips and vacations, but it's actually interesting for other reasons as well.
Yeah. Well, people have to have those videos out there so the rest of us marketers can slip in a few ads once in a while they're enjoying their vacation videos. That's really the whole point, I think. So, but no, I just wanted to mention that I always thought that boy, there's no lawyers that's going to let it that will let us do any of this stuff, especially in franchising. Not the most forward thinking group sometimes, but you kind of stood out from that crowd. And I'm talking probably 8, 9, 10 years ago when we were really getting things rolling.
Well, thanks. And it's funny about that time. Our old friend Ken Colburn and I
Yeah.
had negotiated. We were asked. We were on a committee of the IFA. We were asked to go and address whether or not the IFA would give lists of franchisees to Facebook, which was a request that Facebook had made. And we said, well, let's see what we can get for that. And we sat down with a small group and decided what we wanted. And Ken and I, with Ken's partner, Brandon Disney, ended up going to meetings in California with Facebook and with Google as long as we were there. And we pitched them on the notion that we'll give you this information, but we want to control our brands on your sites. And in Google's case, it was their community site, which has changed rather dramatically. Almost every year they experiment with something else. But in Facebook, it was the main pages. And it took a while. It took about 2 years, and Facebook agreed to it. And they developed a formula and a way that franchise companies could, in fact, do just that. So if you had a franchisee with a lot of followers or likes or whatever the name was that particular year, you'd be able to bring them into the orbit of what the company had. What was interesting along the way as well was that we went and talked to some people, and I had been told that there were a lot of lawyers who were skeptical about this, and one of them was cited to me, and I said, "Gee, it was by Deb Moss over at IFA, who said, there's not so sure this is really a thing." And she said, one of your former partners said, this is a flash in the pan. And I said, I think I know who it is. And that person also said the internet wasn't going to amount to anything. So
They probably weren't real big on TV back in 1950 as well. So,
well, it's an advance, but not necessarily a good one. So
right.
the point is, the law is going to catch up at some point with what business people are doing, and And your job as being a responsible player is to understand what it is people are doing. And if you don't, you're not in a position to really help them understand how they can fit into it the right way.
Yeah, well, thank you for that early work between franchising and Facebook. A lot of that work still stands with, I can't imagine where we'd be now if Facebook and some other platforms didn't understand that relationship. And they struggle with it to this day. But at the end of the day, I think they realize that, you know, the brand is yours. If you're the franchisor, if you're the founder, owner, whatever, that brand is yours. And I think before you guys got involved, I think there would have been um, a lot of misunderstandings with some of the tech giants about, well, no, this brand belongs to that guy and that guy over there. So I think there's at least more clarity now than there was back then.
That's I thank you. And it's an interesting phenomenon. It's not limited to certain segments. Franchising as a method of handling the vertical distribution of goods and services in the economy, which is a less sexy way of saying franchising.
Yeah.
Some people call it licensing. It's the same thing. It's about 45% of the US retail economy. So it's not small at all. But there are insurance companies, there are accounting firms, certainly there are law firms, there are business people, there are legislators, regulators, you name it, and certainly people in the media who don't understand it. And it at some level you shake your head because we eat, sleep, and drink this stuff, but you also realize that there are people who float in and out and have responsibility for very substantial amounts of commerce, and they themselves only come into franchising for a moment. They come out, and when they go in and they come out, they don't get the full appreciation for what it is. So, we've had, I've sat down with legislators, I've sat down with congressional staff and with state legislators and with regulators, and they don't understand it. And it's not as much a knock on them as it is the fact that they're just not immersed in it. So I think our job as advocates for the model, so to speak, and whether it's lawyers, it's people like you who are engaged in helping folks understand how to get their brands out there and be more effective at it, whether it's franchisors, franchisees, or advocates, it's to be able to explain it rationally, clearly, and in a way that helps people understand, as you said, it's a brand. It stands for something. And that means something not only to the brand owners and to the brand users, but also to the consumers, because it's a signal. When I see a brand, it should convey a message that I take back and I synthesize as this is the level of quality somewhere on the map that I'm expecting to receive in terms of the service, the products, what have you.
Yeah, literally, it's a brand. This should be grade A beef, right? So,
Yeah.
um, before we go today, Lee, I want you to think about the rest of this year and early into next year. Is there anything that you're advising your brands to really be thinking about, whether it's something that kind of ties into our political theme today, or anything else in franchising that maybe is coming at us quicker than we think, that everyone should be aware of and maybe start making some plans for?
It's a good question. There's basically everything. The restart when it happens is gonna be different for different folks. First of all, there are some businesses that have not had a significant downturn at all. In fact, they have thrived through this
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
because they're structured for it.
yeah. If you have a drive-through coffee or pizza franchise,
Yeah,
your owners are doing quite well. Mhm.
they certainly are. We have clients who are doing an extraordinarily good job of servicing customers' needs. Some of them are in B2B situations. Some of them are in things that are fairly obvious. Disinfecting offices. It's a big deal.
Yeah,
Some of them are in the retail side of things, and some of them are poised to service businesses and consumers as soon as they start coming out in droves from their cocoons. Others, I think it's going to be a little bit while longer. So, you know, my suggestions would be use this time to get your operational house in order. If you have issues that need to be addressed, this is a moment in time when you can do that. If your documents are not where they should be, this might be a moment in time when you should get them squared away. Take the moment, you know, with most of our clients, the first and only day that they spend time contemplating the relationship that they want to have, as opposed to a single one by one relationship, is when we sit down the first time and work out what their franchise agreement might be. That's an exercise that's um, not without its usefulness on a fairly routine basis. So use that moment. You're also going to be looking at, as the new year turns, changes in the accounting rules, the new revenue recognition rules,
Hmm.
and you're going to have to give some value give some thought, that is, to the value of the services you provide pre-opening to your prospective franchisees. This may be a time not only to do the numeric calculations, but to sit down and take stock of what it is you're actually doing and give yourself credit for what you do, because the chances are you do things that you don't realize have significant value to your incoming franchisees. But take stock of what you're doing and look at people who are, whether they're your competitors, they're in another industry or comparables. Look and see what they do and see if there's something you could be doing better, more efficiently, or otherwise in a different way. Because there aren't that many moments in time when you'll have a chance to do that, and this is probably going to be one of them. And then, you know, the various and sundry housekeeping things that you might be able to accomplish while you have a moment in time when you're not going 100 miles an hour in one direction or in all directions. You got a moment to think. Is your insurance proper? Is it strategically designed for what you actually need? Are you over-insuring for some risks and yet ignoring others that are a considerable concern? Uh, all of those issues need to be accounted for and addressed, and this is the time to do it.
That's some great advice. Lee, I know you speak on these topics. You write quite a bit on these topics. Is there any place we can send any of our listeners to read more or find more? Is that do you have things all housed on the Plave Cook website or LinkedIn, or where should we send folks?
Yeah, actually, our website has a library of articles that we've all written, and it's divided up by topic. We try to keep that pretty current, and hopefully it's an engaging place. I think if you look at any of our social feeds, you'll find that we've got links to most of our pieces there as well.
Very good. And we'll have a link to that with the show notes on the podcast and with the video for this little recording here today as well. I also want to give a shout out real quick to our friends at Photify for putting this video on. Um, we were talking about the election a few minutes ago, coming up in. Is it over yet? Is it election day yet? I think we're about 3 weeks out still. Um, but you know, between now and the election, the noise is not going to get lower. And even after the election, the noise will probably maintain. One side or another will probably get louder. So, you know, the political noise out there is not going away, folks. Uh, uh, that's a sure thing. Lee, your friend Ted Rubin hipped me to that a couple of weeks ago when I was kind of thinking, well, once we get to the election, everything's going to be back to normal. And he was like, it's not. You know, and then we'll have other issues coming up as well, right? After the election, who knows what the next crisis is going to be. So, with our friends at Photify, I think they've got some pretty interesting things that they're doing as far as not counting on advertising, not counting on Google ads and all of the other kinds of things that are getting pretty expensive, crowded, and loud right now. They do a lot of really cool stuff with empowering franchisees and franchisees employees to, you know, share some behind the scenes stuff and share what's happening locally. So if anybody would like to see some of that, I would highly recommend jumping over to photify.com and seeing what those guys are up to today. So, Lee, we're about ready to shut her down for the day, but I can't thank you enough for joining me. It's always a pleasure, and I hope one of these days we're actually breaking bread in person in one of those franchise cities. Maybe sometime in the next year. I hope.
I look forward to it. Our traveling buffet is fun, and I suspect that we will appreciate the chance to see one another. Not just you and I, but all our friends and the people that we work with and have worked with for years and years. And I think when we get out, we'll genuinely realize how much we've all meant to one another all along. And I
Yeah.
appreciate the chance to speak today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Lee. We'll talk to you down the road soon.
Look forward to it.
All right.
Take care
Thank
now.
you, everybody.
Bye bye.